Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Chicago, Zooming with the Alderman interview series. My name is Ilona Vaishnis. The League of Women Voters was founded more than 100 years ago, right here in Chicago, and is now active in all 50 states. Men started joining the League in 1974, but the historical name was retained. The League neither supports nor opposes political candidates. It works to increase understanding of public issues and public policy issues and how we govern ourselves. And one of the examples of how the League works is this Zooming with the Alderman interview series. It invites the public to watch their elected representatives who serve on the Chicago City Council, which produces the policies and ordinances that govern us in Chicago. Our guest today is Alderman Brendan Reilly of the 42nd Ward. Welcome, Alder Reilly.
Thank you.
This session is being recorded, and we have provided the questions to Alder Reilly ahead of time. Let us begin by looking at the map of all of the 50 wards of Chicago.
As far as the general boundaries of my ward, I can tell you that Chicago Avenue is generally the northern boundary for the 42nd Ward. The lake is essentially the eastern boundary from Chicago Avenue south to Balbo in Grant Park. So we have the Magnificent Mile, Navy Pier, the Chicago Spire, the Chicago River, beautiful Grant Park, Millennium Park. And then in the loop, we go down to between Jackson and Van Buren-ish, depending on the block. And then as you can see on the western boundary, it's currently the expressway between Van Buren and roughly Kinsey. And then essentially we jog back across the Chicago River around Blommer's Chocolate. And the Chicago River becomes our western boundary up to Chicago Avenue again. And then we do jut up into the Gold Coast between State Street and essentially Lakeshore Drive. So geographically, it's a rather dense ward. It shrinks every 10 years because we keep growing population here. We grow about 30 to 35,000 by 30 to 35,000 people every 10 years. That's what the last two censuses have showed. And so that's one thing to consider. But we are basically we're 60% of the city's economy and currently about 100,000 people.
So wait a minute, and how many people do you have in your ward?
We were undercounted apparently in Illinois in the census, but between 90 and 100,000 people currently live downtown. And I'm supposed to represent about 60 to 65,000 people. And as a result, that requires us to shrink the geography of the downtown ward every 10 years with the census. So while the portion of the economic pie continues to grow in this ward and the population continues to grow, the actual boundaries continue to shrink.
So would you describe the 42nd Ward as residential, commercial, or industrial?
Yeah, all of those things, actually. We are the pure definition of a mixed use district. As I mentioned, we have tens of thousands of business licenses in my ward. Obviously, the Loop drives that and the Mag Mile and parts of Streeterville. But we also are home to the city's tourism industry. Many of the city's tourism destinations are located in the 42nd Ward. The Riverwalk, Navy Pier, Millennium Park and the Bean. Certainly Grant Park is our city's front yard. So we have a lot of things going on here. But the fastest growing residential population in the entire city is here in the 42nd Ward. We drove nearly 60% of the city's population growth over the last 10 years. So while other parts of the city haven't been doing quite so well, despite all the challenges that we're facing right now, the downtown ward continues to grow at a rather exponential rate. So I'm very proud of that. I think a big part of that is about addressing quality of life issues quickly. Certainly, we have a lot of challenges with public safety we need to tackle. But we are still a very attractive place for people to work and live. And thank goodness we have continued growth in headquarter relocations downtown. That brings more population as well. So all of these different uses come together in my ward. And a big part of my job is balancing between these various interests, between the business interests, the residential interests, hospitality and tourism interests. And that's what makes this job complicated but fun.
So there are many. So what would you say the few key issues that concern the residents of your ward? They may be different in different parts of.
I'm betting that the issues that my constituents are concerned about are the same issues that constituents in every ward are worried about. And first and foremost, it's public safety and crime. You can't walk a block in the downtown ward without running into someone who raises concerns about it. And to be honest, my colleagues and I have never seen it this bad in decades. And that level of lawlessness poses a real threat to the vitality of residential neighborhoods, but also the city's business district, which I represent. And when tourists and shoppers don't feel safe coming downtown to State Street and the Magnificent Mile, that is a real concern, whether you live downtown or not. Because if that kind of traffic dries up, I mentioned this ward is 60% of the city's economy. If that engine slows down, we can't pay for anything, no matter where you live in the city. So public safety is by far the chief concern for my constituents. Certainly it's front of mind for me, because it's impacting my constituents' daily quality of life, and frankly, the economic vitality of downtown.
So let's look at you for a few minutes. When did you first join the Chicago City Council? I
ran for city council in 2007 against a 37-year incumbent. He had been in office longer than I had been alive. His name was Brendan Reilly, and he served on the city council here since 1971, the year of my birth. And for a very long time, I think Alderman Materis did a good job. I mean, many of the older skyscrapers we see downtown were projects that Alderman Materis negotiated. So he certainly had his fingerprint on the development and growth of downtown. But over time, he lost touch with his constituents. He'd been in office for nearly 4 decades. And development, real estate development, is something that impacts everyone's quality of life and everyone's neighborhood. And I think that the alderman had gotten so comfortable in that job, he stopped publicly vetting projects and having a transparent review process with his constituents. And as a result, they wanted someone different. So that's how I came along. I got elected in 2007, and I've been serving ever since.
Well, all right. Okay. I hope you keep rejuvenating yourself. What made you decide to run for re-election in 2019?
Yeah, in 2019, when we knew we'd be getting a new mayor, I wanted to make sure that we had some stable leadership on the city council. There was a lot of turnover in city council races. We lost a lot of seniority, a lot of institutional knowledge. And while running for mayor was something I considered at the time, I thought that stability on the council was more important. And so that's why I chose to run for re-election. I also had some major projects in queue that I wanted to see through. Very complex developments.
Later.
So it was a combination of factors, but that's why I ran.
Do you have other employment, additional employment?
No, this is it.
Okay. So you are currently the president pro tempore of the Chicago City Council.
Yes.
And what does that entail?
Essentially, I preside over the city council when the mayor is not able. So oftentimes during a city council meeting, the mayor will need to go take a phone call or have a brief meeting. I will then assume the chair and the gavel, and I will preside over the council meeting and administer the rules of order and all of that. But more importantly, the president pro tem is also in charge of the city council's legislative reference bureau. And that used to be a useless appendage at City Hall. It was not well funded, but the purpose of the Legislative Reference Bureau is to serve as lawyers and legislative drafters for the City Council, so that we would not be dependent upon the Mayor's Law Department to prepare ordinances for us. We could have a level of independence. And for decades, because the people that ran that office were loyal to whomever the mayor was, it was never properly staffed, and it was not supposed to be a resource for us. When I took over as pro tem in 2019, I immediately hired the best lawyers I could from the private sector and from the state of Illinois, who are parliamentarian experts and also legislative drafters. And so for the first time in decades, we now have a fully staffed Legislative Reference Bureau that is advising all 50 members of the council and drafting all of our legislation, which is a huge departure from just a couple of years ago when we had to depend on the mayor's office to do all of that for us. So it is establishing some more independence for the City Council, but I'm very proud of the work we've done to really bolster that office and make it a real resource for members of the City Council.
Thank you. Interesting to hear. Speaking of the City Council, would you like to see any changes made in the operation of the City Council?
Yes, I'd like to see us establish the Office of Legislative Counsel. And what would that be? It's essentially the City Council's equivalent of the Corporation Counsel who advises the mayor. We need our own chief lawyer and someone who can advise us during City Council debates on parliamentary matters. As it stands today, the Mayor's Corporation Counsel is basically the final arbiter of any process debate or concerns raised about parliamentary procedure during a City Council meeting. Members of the council deserve to have the same firepower on their side so that we can push back if we disagree with whomever the mayor is at the time when they're ruling from the chair. So that would also allow us to have our own lawyers to provide us with advice separate from Legislative Reference Bureau during committee debates. And also it would give our committee chairman subpoena power, so that when we want to compel witnesses to come to City Hall and provide testimony, they have to show up. As it stands today, when we invite witnesses to come testify before committee, they can simply say, no, thank you. With subpoena power, we can compel them to show up. And think about how useful that might have been with Commonwealth Edison or some of these other big public utilities that are raising rates astronomically or getting in trouble on ethics. We could have had these folks before us answering all those tough questions. So that is the number one thing I'd like to change on the City Council, is to better empower the council to be more independent from the executive branch.
Let us get back to security and gun violence. Which actions by the city to reduce gun violence in Chicago have been effective, or do you expect will be effective in reducing gun violence in our city?
You know, when it comes to policy and lawmaking, municipalities do not have a lot of tools in the box. Really, to regulate guns, it has to be done at the federal and at the state level. And obviously the feds have shown they have no appetite for it. But there's a lot of opportunity to tighten up policy at the state level. At the city level, we do the things that impact day to day on the ground. So the Chicago Police Department, for example, last year recovered over 12,000 illegal guns, which is insane. 12,000 illegal guns, which are easily replenished from Indiana, Wisconsin, and Iowa, where it is very easy to obtain a firearm. Those are the issues that we're dealing with: criminal background checks, extensive, deeper background checks to make sure we're not arming folks with severe mental illness. Also restricting the sale of automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons, a gun registry. These are the kinds of things that we need. They have to be passed at the federal or state levels. But those are the things that really are going to move the needle. But we have an open border with Indiana, and they have gun shows every weekend. And so as our police officers are removing these guns from the streets, they're going and replacing them within hours. And that's a real concern. And that's not something the city of Chicago can tackle on its own. Certainly, we support gun buyback programs. We partner with community organizations and churches, and that certainly helps get a fair number of firearms off the street. But when you have a tidal wave of guns flowing into this city. There isn't a lot for city policymakers to do to change that. State and federal penalties are far stiffer. The most we can impose criminally in the city is a 6-month jail visit. So they're not going to use our charges for major gun crimes. We need the state to do more. I would recommend one thing that has to be looked at, and that is in the criminal justice reform area related to juveniles. We don't want to be institutionalizing juveniles who commit crime, but we need to relook at the penalties that we impose for juveniles who commit gun crimes, because there is absolutely not a deterrent in place. So scary for these kids to realize, wait, I can't touch that weapon. I may get in really, really serious trouble. The adults who are leading these criminal enterprises know that the juvenile code is far, far weaker on penalties. And so they're really, literally, unintended, I think, our code is incentivizing gang leaders to train children to become murderers with guns.
Is there something that the city can do about it? The city can do about
The
this?
city can lobby our state lawmakers, but all the repercussions we feel on the ground here in the city of Chicago, those are policies passed in Springfield, Illinois. And as someone who used to work in Springfield as a legislative staffer, I can tell you that's where the rubber meets the road. So I'm not passing the buck. I will do anything that I need to do to get our lawmakers to do the right thing. But in the last 2 years, all they've done is take tools away from the police and made their jobs more difficult and made it easier on folks who are committing certain crimes. So that's the wrong direction. The city, I think, council can put pressure on our legislators to do a better job down there. But there aren't meaningful policies we can do here besides the long-term investments in the south and west sides of Chicago. But that payoff doesn't come for a generation. We need to make the investments, but we have an urgent situation on the ground right now. And we need more accountability for folks who commit crimes with guns.
Let us turn to some city council procedures. League members have observed that the city council committees and then the city council regularly pass agenda items without allowing the public to know what will be voted on or even see the wording of the bills. The public gets to see everything a couple of days after. We understand that this is because of the provision in Rule 41 that allows direct introduction of items to committees by the mayor and the city departments. Now, direct introduction items bypass the clerk's office, so no numbers are assigned, and the texts are not posted on Legistar, making citizen input impossible. Would you support requiring that direct introduction items be assigned item numbers and that their text be available to the public 2 business days before the meeting when a vote is expected?
Yes, I would.
Yes.
That is a procedure that only the executive branch gets to take advantage of. I can't go and directly introduce an ordinance to committee. And the reason why I was told is because of transparency, right? We want public input. So the city council is held to one standard where it is quite transparent, yet the administration can pop a piece of legislation to a committee and no one even knows what it is, and that's wrong. So no, I would absolutely support that change. It would be good for public discourse, and it would certainly give your city council a bit more power in the legislative process.
All right, good to know. What do you think about Chicago adopting ranked choice voting? Currently, if there is no majority winner, nobody gets 50% plus 1 vote. There is a runoff election between the 2 highest voters several weeks later. In ranked choice voting, candidates are ranked by the voter according to the voter's preference. And if there's no majority winner, the race is decided by the votes already cast. And there is no separate runoff election. So how do you feel about using ranked choice voting in February and doing away with the runoff in April?
I'm open to the idea of doing ranked choice voting. I'm not sure the city's ready to administer that the next election, but I think it is worth talking about it. You need to make some substantial changes to how the ballot is provisioned, and also how the Board of Elections would administer that. And the last thing I want to do is, by rushing this, have that negatively impact participation in 2023 election. But I am open to that, trying a new system. I think that the runoff system here in Chicago is antiquated, it's expensive, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And often, if we looked at the last mayoral election, for example, Mayor Lightfoot, then candidate Lightfoot, and President Preckwinkle, they made the runoff, but with 17% and 16% of the vote respectively, certainly not with a mandate. And so in a lot of folks' minds, they had a choice between two candidates that they didn't ever intend to support. And so we had a really interesting runoff in that year. But no, I'm completely open to try something new here. And I do understand the system, and yeah, why not? I would just say, let's make sure we have the time to properly implement it, so that when you do show it off, it works and people are satisfied with it.
Great, thank you. Now, if people wanted to support one of your initiatives, what would you suggest they do? For example, should they send their expression of support to your office, or to the members of a specific committee in the city council? Or should they address a written statement to the city council? Or is there something else they should do if they want to support some initiative of yours?
In a perfect world, all of the above. But if you have to pick and choose, when there's a piece of legislation in front of city council, even though it's routed through a specific committee with only a limited number of members, if you want to provide input in the most meaningful way, you should send it to all 50 members of the city council. And if it's a piece of legislation a specific alderman is sponsoring or spearheading, simply carbon copy that alderperson the bottom of the email or the letter that's sent. That way, the sponsor is getting a record of your sentiment, but then all 50 members of the council are at the same time. That's the best approach, because even whether or not you are a voting member of a city council committee, you can still come and participate in debate and discussion and ask questions as an alderperson. And so it's best when you're educating us on issues you're passionate about, hit us all at once. That doesn't mean that if it's a particularly charged issue and a super controversial one, that you wouldn't also want to take the extra step of reaching out specifically to the voting committee members. As you know, and the League of Women Voters sure knows, that most of the legislative work occurs in the committee process. Once these ordinances get to the city council, really the debate is closed. People know if they're going to vote yes or no. There's not a lot of persuading going on at that point. So I would say engage early and go broadly. And then as you get closer to a committee vote, really focus in on those people who have to vote in that first step. But that would be the approach that I'd recommend. And I think folks who've taken that approach have been effective in advocating for their causes.
Thank you. And lastly, what are several things that you would really like to get done, or at least set in motion during this term, which ends your term, which ends in 2023?
Some of them are definitely aspirational. There are some that are immediate.
Go ahead.
As far as development goes, I really do want the former Spire development site on the Chicago River near Ogden Slip to get going again. And my hope is by this fall, construction will start, because that will deliver tens of millions of dollars in public benefits, including DuSable Park, right near Lake Point Tower and Navy Pier. And so that is a huge project that I negotiated literally for years, that I want to make sure is underway before this term ends. I also negotiated construction of a new public park in Streeterville at Ogden Plaza Park near the Sheraton Hotel and the Lowe's Hotel. That has been stalled because of a garage operator that wouldn't give us access to that park area. We've cleared that up, and my hope is we can get that project underway too. As far as longer term goals, certainly there's a lot of work to be done to cleaning and making more safe the CTA. We really all depend on public transit so much, And during the pandemic, it has gone to seed. The trains are not clean or well maintained. There is dangerous activity on the trains 24 hours a day now. And we need to stabilize the safety and security of our train system. It's critical, especially for senior citizens who depend on that to get where they're going, especially to medical appointments. So CTA improvements are drastically going to be needed over the next 12 months. And then getting 2,000 more police officers hired. We're down 2,000 police officers in our department. We are well under-resourced, and it shows in our crime statistics. We need to get 2 more police helicopters in the air. We have 1 functioning helicopter for the city's police department in Chicago. LA has 17 police helicopters, and New York has 9. We have 1 on a good day. And if we're going to get this carjacking under control, the 2 biggest departments in America have proven it's the helicopters that catch these folks. We don't do high-speed chases anymore. We need helicopters in the air. So that'll be a major budget priority for me this fall. I'm going to fight like heck to get it done, because that would immediately move the needle on public safety in Chicago.
Thank you. Well, Alderman Reilly, thank you so much for being with us today. The interview will be this Thursday, June 2nd at 6 p.m. Now, you and everyone who registered for today's program but is not a league member will receive an email with a link to this interview, and you will also be able to sign up for notices of future programs. And there will be always also an invitation to join the league, because we're always open to civic-minded men and women who want to strengthen democracy. We hope that you will all join us for future Zooming with the Alderman interviews, and you can always revisit all the interviews of all of the Chicago aldermen and women on the League of Women Voters of Chicago website. Our next Zooming with the Alderman will feature an interview with Alderman James Gardiner of the 45th Ward. And the premiere of that will be Thursday, June 9 at 6 p.m. We hope you all enjoy learning about Chicago, 1 ward at a time. And thank you.
Thank you.